things as we go through them today. With that, I know that leading into today's presentation, a survey went out to everybody. And one of the things that I thought we might do here to really kind of set the stage is begin to look at a couple of the questions and why we asked them. One of the questions we spoke to or asked about was multi-factor authentication. We're going to find through today's presentation that multi-factor, the ability to be challenged for a code or to have something pop up on your mobile device that says, yeah, I can get into my email system, is one of the key things that an organization can do now to protect their email. We're finding that many cyber insurance companies are requiring that. And in fact, multi-factor becomes one of those items that would prevent you from getting a cyber insurance policy. We're going to talk about backups today and how important they are. And everybody seems to laugh when I ask questions about backup. But the reality is we don't ask enough questions of our IT resources or management team about all things backup. We're going to talk about that today. The notion of a backup rehearsal, not only knowing that we're backing up the things that we need to back up, but then how long it would take to actually get those items, those systems, the data back is going to be one of those key elements in today's discussion. Question 7's focused on patch management. And I think a lot of organizations believe that they are patching systems, but more often than not, what we're finding is that the patching of systems, yeah, it's the laptop or maybe the desktop computer I use, or maybe it's the servers that are in the back room, or maybe cloud systems. But a lot of times we forget that patch management also needs to be considered for mobile devices. Maybe that Cisco phone or your voice over IP phone that sits on your desk, or maybe other vendor systems like printers that are actually connected to your network. So we'll talk a little bit about patch management. The notion of filtering email, in the past, business leaders always wanted to filter email to kind of keep their pulse or their finger on what was going on and flowing through their email systems. Today, it's more important that we filter email to try and keep the phishing emails and the malware-based emails out. So again, we'll talk a little bit about that. That's why we asked it. We find that a lot of organizations think they're filtering email, but maybe they're not filtering enough. Question 9 focused on something called the acceptable use policy. And a lot of organizations will make you sign an acceptable use policy when you start your employment with them. Basically, it's the rules of the road and how you use technology. And it may even speak to how often you change your password. But a lot of organizations may see that as kind of a one and done type activity. And we believe that the acceptable use policy, password policies, in fact, a litany of policies are going to be key to keeping the organization safe. And anymore, it's just not enough to change your password. We need to make sure that it's of an appropriate length and complexity. Again, we'll touch a little more on that as we walk through the presentation here this morning. Access control is going to be key. What we find is a lot of companies have an onboarding process. Hey, when a new employee shows up, hey, get them set up, make sure they look like Sally or John, make sure they have access to these systems, but they may not have the corresponding, hey, this person has changed their role type of policy or process, or this person's left the employee of the company, an offboarding process. Again, we'll touch about that. And then finally, this notion of cybersecurity and training awareness, understanding that keeping your employees aware and trained is vital to ensuring this notion of the human factor, that we can address it. So really, that's why we asked some of those questions and how we got into this. Thank you for those that are responding. Certainly, we can make sure that when we get to the Q&A portion of today's discussion, we'll touch base on those questions and attempt to answer any things that you might have put up in item 12 as far as what might be keeping you up at night. Cybersecurity has become just this huge discussion topic, and a lot of folks will sit and talk about it, but yet they don't really know where or how to get started. So really the next slide in the next few minutes, we're going to talk through some of the things that we've seen in the organizations that we work with, some of the things we've observed through working with the insurance companies to help organizations get ready for their cyber renewal, and just some general rules of the road, rules of thumb that we see out there as far as getting started in this space that we call cybersecurity. Um, First and foremost, action number one is knowing where you have risk. A lot of times you have an internal IT department that says, hey, we've taken a look at things, or maybe every once in a while your insurance broker comes in and runs you through a process. But understanding where your risk is and knowing where you need to focus your attention is really the first step. Again, a lot of times that might start with a discussion with your management team, with your current in-house IT team, or maybe your external IT contractor to say, hey, have we recently completed a kind of risk assessment, an IT assessment, a cybersecurity assessment? You know, all these terms for all these different things all focus on someone taking time to go through a structured process to identify where some of the vulnerabilities or risks might be in your environment. A lot of times, organizations will have what are called vulnerability scans run, or they might have something called a penetration test, especially if you're taking credit cards or you process medical data. These are all great resources to begin to understand where your risk might be. Getting to the bottom of that, seeing what you have out there, can help you get what I would call a baseline score. A lot of times organizations will actually engage us to come in and help to run the IT team or the management team through a process of getting that baseline risk assessment so that they understand the score. It's a pretty painless procedure, takes about an hour. It's a series of questions, about 50 questions that we would sit and chat with IT members or your management team to kind of track their responses. There's then some assessments that we run in the background as far as a scan of the network, again, to get you to a baseline security score so that you know where and how to get started. Action number two, as far as the verify your multi-factor authentication and backup. You know, these two items are really some low-hanging fruit that organizations can look at and take action on immediately to increase your cyber protections or maybe start your cyber journey. And in fact, as I alluded to earlier, a lot of insurance companies won't even insure you from a cybersecurity perspective unless you can provide proof that you have multi-factor authentication protecting your email systems, or protecting your ability to connect remotely to your network, or even maybe implementing multi-factor to protect key applications like your accounting system or maybe your CRM system. But going out and taking that first step to saying, hey, do we have multi-factor implemented? Am I forced to, when I log into email, look at my phone and maybe say, yeah, that's me, through the Microsoft Authenticator, or maybe you're using a product like Duo or a myriad of other tools that are on the market. Do you have MFA protections in place to protect your email systems, key services, key applications, and the VPN connection? You know, we also look at the backup component as something that you could do right now to begin to understand, hey, are we backing up all the data we would need to restore if an event were to occur? Well, what kind of event, Boomer? Well, ransomware is the one that we seem to see in the news so often, which is where organizations walk in one day and all of a sudden find this little note on their screen that says their computers have been encrypted. And unless you pay a ransom, you're not going to be able to get your data back. Well, in a lot of cases, if organizations know that their backups are good, that they have one that is offsite, that was not part of the crypto process where it was locked up and has you can't get to, if you know you've got that sitting out there, all of a sudden you have some peace of mind that says, okay, I know I've got a backup, so I can begin to restore key systems. But then kind of the next component to that is understanding, okay, I know I've got my data, but how long is it going to take? A lot of organizations are amazed that when we walk them through a backup verification process, that it takes tens of hours to restore complete systems, not just an hour or two. And a lot of times, going through that rehearsal, taking the step now to see how long it would take, increases the peace of mind of the management team that when something occurs, and yes, I said when something occurs, you'll be prepared and able to restore the data and the systems you need, because you took these steps now to look at your backups. One of the things we hear so much about, maybe in passing with the IT teams, maybe as part of the discussions, I hope, with your management team, is about patching. And we touched about it earlier in our questionnaire, that making sure that we're patching our systems. And our systems could be the laptop that you're watching this presentation on, or a desktop computer, the servers that support your organization, that host the data, maybe your cloud-based resources or the servers that are in the cloud, key applications, like maybe a Great Plains or an accounting application, ensuring that your systems, your applications, and also the devices that are plugged into your network are patched. Now, those devices could include the phone that is actually sitting on my desk, or it could be the system that your HVAC vendor has plugged into your network to monitor and maintain the temperature in your organization. A lot of groups outsource their audio visual, and there's huge audio visual systems that are plugged into your network. Part of patching is ensuring that all of these vendors, all of these systems, all of these devices, any device, in fact, that is connected to your network is patched. I always seem to get a chuckle when I talk about passwords. And in this day and age, okay, Boomer, yeah, we've got passwords, but then I always ask the question, well, how often are you changing them? Well, okay, we might change them, twice a year, 4 times a year. Well, that's a great first step. Changing your passwords often is a way to ensure that your systems are secure, but then also making sure that those passwords are of an adequate length, right? It used to be we'd have a password, maybe 4, 5, 6 characters, but this day and age, 10-digit, 15-digit passwords are becoming more of the recommended length. And that creates some heartburn for folks, right? Long passwords are easy to forget. On top of not only having a lengthy password, but having one that's complex, that includes capital letters, lowercase letters, numbers, and symbols, will help ensure the strength of your password. And then finally, when we talk about password management, we're talking about the fact that you don't allow folks to reuse things or passwords or components. So I have one organization that fights me tooth and nail about this notion of retained passwords and ensuring that I can't use the same password or derivative of it, period over period. I know of one organization that, their CEO, his password is race car. It started out race car 123, and he thinks he's being crafty by taking it to race car 456, putting in some of the controls such that organizational users can't do that is going to be key to your password management process. Also, taking the opportunity to look and review on a periodic basis privilege and access to systems. A lot of times, IT teams will say, oh, you call into the help desk and I can't get into this. Yeah. And they just give a person admin in order to get into a system. Or you have administrative access to your local computer. That's where we begin to talk about privilege. And really what we want to do is to ensure that people have the privilege or the access to information, to systems and data that they need, but that they don't have more than what they need. That way, we're going to ensure that if something were to happen, the threat actor couldn't get in and move around. Other things of note under this passwords passing and other protections is the notion of logs. When you log into a system, there's a log entry that said Boomer logged in at this time and at this place. If I access a piece of data, hey, I reached out to this folder and got access to this file, or maybe I edited this Excel spreadsheet. All that log data is important to keep because in many cases, when threat actors access your system or actually penetrate your system, they lay in wait. They don't take immediate activity, but they sit in the background and collect intelligence about what's going on in your network. And about the time you figure out that, oh, I think we have a problem. I think that we have some type of access going on or a breach, you're going to want to have your log data to go back and see. Recently, I worked through an event where a CFO of an organization was successfully phished. And in that situation, the threat actors got access to a system in April, but really didn't take any action until May. So they just sat back in the background and watched. Well, the fact that we could pinpoint when they came in because of the logs, we could also pinpoint how the individuals got the access that they did. That's why log management is going to be so key, is one of those other protections. And then certainly this notion of vulnerability scanning. Now that's a big phrase that geeks like to throw around, but it's actually an active process that on a recurring basis, we go out and we scan your network to see where the vulnerabilities might exist. Maybe a patch was missed on a audiovisual system. Maybe there's a password that isn't strong enough, or the default password might be still in use on a printer. All of these things will pop up in a vulnerability scan, and it gives you that sense of, hey, where is my risk? In fact, it can help going back to action number one, knowing your score and being able to say, yeah, I've plugged these holes and have filled in and are securing my environment. Action four, we call build and train your team. And, the first question that we get asked a lot is, well, who really should be on the team? Well, there's a lot of answers to that. And organizations have different opinions and thoughts on it. But when I talk to organizations about building their cyber team, first and foremost, we're going to want somebody from the management team on your cyber team. And not only do we want them on your team, but we want them engaged. We want to make sure that they believe in what we're talking about in the steps that should be taken. Certainly, we're going to want some representation from the IT, the internal IT department, or maybe your outsourced IT. Representation from the different business units, from HR, from finance, from sales is all going to be key to building that cyber team. And then there's really some external folks that you're going to want on your team. First and foremost, your attorney. If there were ever a cyber event, the first call you've got to make when you understand that you've had a breach or that something's gone on is you want to call your attorney because you have privilege, and that way you can talk and not everything would be discoverable. So you're going to want your attorney on your team. And then certainly, hopefully, everybody on this call has cyber insurance. But if you don't, you ought to consider go getting it. But on your team, you want your insurance provider, you want your broker, so that if a cyber event were to occur, you talk to the attorney and then you begin to talk to your insurance company to understand what your coverages are and where you may be. To me, that's the team that you want to build. You also want to train your staff and make sure that they're aware of just all of the different, things that they're going to come up against. I could tell you I can tell you right now that someone on your team in the recent days has probably sent an email and they were in a hurry and it had an attachment on it. And when they were in Outlook or in Google, those tools are so helpful that they auto prompt you. When I start to type in John, yeah, I need to send that attachment to Boomer, and I type in John, it's got the attachment, but maybe I didn't talk to Boomer the last time. And so when I type in John and I'm thinking John Boomershine, all of a sudden John Smith pops up. Yeah, that's the one I want. Hit it, boom, out the door it goes. So often data breaches start with an inappropriate email going out the door with data on it. So what we want to do is to raise the awareness of A, how easy this is, because we're human, but B, how we can take actions. How, when a phishing email comes in, how should we respond? We use a tool here at Black Ink where we actively phish your staff. So once a month, we're sending out an email that is a phishing email that the organization, when they get it, if somebody clicks on it, we're able to see what they clicked. Even maybe if they surrendered data, we're able to see what they surrendered and then work with that employee, the team, to understand, wait a minute, when this came in, this is how you could tell that it was a bogus email or a phishing email. And through that ongoing training, we're going to raise their awareness. Another way to really help train your team is to ensure that you have discussions with your team when you sit down and have your normal weekly, bi-weekly meetings. Keeping people cyber aware is making sure that we talk about it. Having your IT team maybe come in and talk about an incident that might have occurred recently to raise that awareness, to instill the notion that if you do something or see something, you want to say something, and that our organization is safe for you to, come in and say, wow, I got this email and I responded to it, but I'm really thinking maybe that's a problem. We want the team to be aware of all the different attack vectors. We also want them to have comfort that if they see something or do something, we want them to be able to say something. So that's where we see in action number 4, building and training the team. Action number 5 is kind of one that has some depth, and we find that most organizations really don't have this in place, but it's to review or even to develop the policies and procedures and plans before they're needed or as part of your overall cyber security posture. A lot of folks, and I alluded to earlier, an acceptable use policy, maybe that policy that you have when you first come in that says, hey, I'm going to give you a laptop and this is the way you need to treat it. Or if it gets stolen, you need to tell us immediately when it happens. All of these things are, or could be, or should be, and an acceptable use policy. But there's also other policies out there that you need to make sure are documented. How the organization might handle an asset as they begin to retire it. What steps is the organization going to take to make sure there's no data on that system? Maybe how we call it a configuration management policy, but how is a laptop set up before it's handed over to a staff? Is it hardened? Or is software that is not needed taken off of it? Do we encrypt the local hard drive on laptops and desktops? So if they are stolen, nobody's going to get data off of them. These are all examples of maybe policies or procedures that need to be in place to protect the organization. We can send you after this kind of our best practices document that identifies really about 18 different policies, procedures, or plans that organizations should have in place to help protect them and to make them cyber safe. When talking about plans, though, there are a couple key plans that every organization should have. The first plan is the notion of an incident response plan. I think you heard me earlier say, hey, it's not a matter of if, but when an event is going to happen at your organization. Unfortunately, that's the world we live in. And being an Eagle Scout, knowing my Boy Scout motto of always being prepared with an incident response plan is key. Now, a lot of people are like, how do I get started? What's in an incident response plan? We can help you with that. In fact, we have some documentation we can also send you about the incident response, but it can be as simple as a list of, hey, if we have an incident, it's defining what an incident might be, right? That notion in that example, I said sending an email to the wrong person, that may not be an incident, but depending on the sensitivity of the document that was sent, could be. Or if we come in and we have ransomware, that could be an incident. But understanding what an incident is, the team that you're going to call together that's going to help lead addressing the issue that has come up, and then knowing the first steps you're going to take. Well, if this is a ransomware event, okay, we're going to get the IT team in, but we're going to call first our attorney. Then we're going to make sure that all impacted systems are turned off. We're going to make sure that we don't destroy certain systems that might give us the forensics data we need to assess how bad this ransomware attack might be, or what data might have been exfiltrated or taken from a system. Again, this should all be steps or actions that are talked about and identified in the incident response plan. When an event happens, everybody's under stress, and having a piece of paper in front of you that's able to say, this is what we're going to do, this is who's responsible, this is how we're going to walk through it, ensures that at least you have a plan and you can go at it from some point of comfort and confidence because you've thought about it. Eisenhower said that, no plan survives its first interaction with the enemy. That's true. Every incident is a little bit different, but knowing that you've talked through who's going to be on the team and some of those first steps is going to be key. So incident response plan is one of those plans. A business continuity plan. Hey, from the business's perspective, these are the systems, these are the computers, these are the people that we need to get up and running first in order to protect and sustain business operations is key. So you're going to want to go through the process of developing a business continuity plan, or a BCP. Now, these plans can be tough. There's a lot of help that we can provide and give you to get started, but it's also an opportunity where you might reach out to external folks to help get you started. Black Ink, maybe your accounting firm, your legal folks, they can all help your organization get started to develop these things. But the key here is to go out and to develop a plan before it's needed. So the key plans from my perspective are incident response, business continuity. There's also something out there called the disaster recovery plan. That's going to be key, but we first got to get those incident response and business continuity plans developed. So that kind of leads me to my last question, which is, hey, we are all human. It's easy to make mistakes. It's easy to invite these threat actors in through phishing emails or alternative means. In fact, one of the things we do to train staff and make them cyber aware is we leave USB keys behind, because how often do you walk into a room and, oh, somebody left a USB key. Oh, I'm going to put it in my computer, open it up and see who it belongs to because I want to return it to them. Wait a minute. There's a spreadsheet here that says payroll. I'm going to open that up. These things happen, and it's very easy for them to happen. And what is your plan to respond? Where are you at on your cybersecurity journey? Have you had the discussion with your management team, with your business team, with your attorneys to say, we know what our first steps are going to be? Getting out in front of this and saying, hey, I've got a plan. Or no, I don't know my plan. In fact, I don't even know what my risks are. I'm not sure about MFA and backup, but being able to say that out loud and saying, we're going to start is really key. And starting is absolutely imperative. If you've not had the discussions with your management team, that's one of the first things you ought to do as you go into the week ahead, is to see if you can schedule that conversation to say, what is our plan? So those are the action blocks that we have identified. Kat, I'm going to let you jump in here and start the discussion.
Awesome. Thank you, Boomer. I really appreciate that. I think it's, super helpful just to bring awareness to some of those key pieces. Kind of just to start off, we talk a lot about planning, being proactive, and, say it does happen, what happens next? If you were kind of creating that action plan, as we laid out, say it's difficult to get employee buy-in, what would your next step be regarding that?
So employee buy-in, everybody believes that it's never going to happen to them, right? Oh, I know a bogus email when it comes, and I know I wouldn't click on it. I think raising the awareness is kind of that first step to get some buy-in. When we run a phishing exercise against the organization, we share the data. And typically, if it's the first time we're running through, we'll have quote unquote a success rate. And that's a bad thing, right? You don't want to be successful in a phishing campaign, but we'll have a success rate somewhere in the 30 or 40% area where people have clicked on things. And it's not going back to the individual, but helping the team understand that, hey, we were successful in that. And that's part of this human nature thing, right? So helping the team to see, hey, it happens, so that we can begin to talk about it, is really the first step that we take in order to raise the buy-in. The second thing is then working with the management team. You always have to have a management sponsor. Kat, you have something funky going on over your right shoulder. It's kind of humorous. So management buy-in is going to be key, right? So helping or finding a sponsor on the senior team that can help to say, hey, this is important to the organization, to help drive that message into the employees is going to be key.
Awesome, thank you. And as we talk about, okay, you can do as much as you can to bring awareness and education to your first line of defense, your employees. What are some tools that you might be able to implement within your organization that help that first line of defense, your employees?
So, first of all, we've talked a little bit about cyber awareness training. That would be one thing. The second thing is there are some tools in the marketplace. One is a product called Umbrella. It's from Cisco, but it helps the organization protect employees from being human when they're in the office and when they're outside of the office. So often we're inundated with emails that have links, and whether I'm on my mobile device, maybe bored out of my brain at a daughter's swim meet, or I'm sitting here clicking through things, the potential of clicking on a bogus link is high. Using a product like Umbrella, where if an employee does it and clicks on something, Umbrella is a tool that's going to say, hey, through us filtering links and websites for tens of millions of employees, we know this link to be potentially bogus, or it is bogus, and have it pop up and say, are you really sure you want to go here? Or this is a bogus link. We're going to block you from going to it. Umbrella is one of those key tools. Um, Also, having the right antivirus and malware tool is going to be helpful in helping the employee to protect themselves. It used to be that an AV tool just sat there and scanned your computer from time to time, but now we have AV tools that are based on artificial intelligence engines to sit there and scan your computer all the time. And those types of tools can also help prevent a human from being human and clicking on wrong or bogus links or what have you. Certainly, training other than cybersecurity is important as well. So often we think that everybody has grown up in the IT age and we're familiar with Outlook or Word or what have you, but providing some level of just training about the different capabilities that are built into Outlook to help protect ourselves from this is going to be key. So there are a lot of tools that we can bring to bear, that we can wrap around the employee on their laptop, on their device, to ensure that they don't shoot themselves in the foot or in their foot.
Yeah, and one thing, you speak about passwords. I think we all can agree. Sometimes having to change your password every 3 months can be a big pain, but there are some tools that can help with that. Boomer, do you want to kind of talk through what password management tools we've used and what might be helpful in other organizations?
Sure. There's a lot of modern password tools that are on the marketplace. One is called LastPass, one is OneKey or OneKeyPass. All of these tools are configured in a way that they're going to integrate into your browser and your system and allow you to safely and securely store passwords, right? So there's going to be an encryption key, which makes it very difficult for anyone to hack into your quote unquote password database. but also those tools are going to provide the ability to help generate these 14-digit passwords that have a level of complexity that aren't tied to a word, and make it very simple to store them. On my system today, I'm using a product called LastPass. And as I hit different websites, LastPass is going to pop up and say, hey, we have the password for that. Well, let us help you log in. Or when I go to a site that it doesn't, it's going to prompt me to say, let us help you create a password and then store it for you. And the great thing about these tools is once I've got it set up on my laptop, I also can integrate it out to the device that I might use for work. So I think more often than not, I'm accessing systems on my laptop, maybe on my tablet or my mobile device, my phone. And if your organization allows you and manages those devices, you can extend these password tools to those other devices to help ensure the use of more complex, longer passwords isn't a burden. Lastly, all of these password tools need to be protected by two-factor authentication. So when I go in and implement my password tool, I'm going to tie it to my two-factor so that I get prompted when I get into it as well.
Thank you. And I know we have some people on the call who are in manufacturing, and I think we've seen different supply chains get hit through cyber attacks. What can we expect in the future as we continue to see, vulnerabilities in the cyber security space, especially as, attackers are looking at how can we disrupt certain supply chains or vendors to make a bigger impact. What do you see from that perspective, Boomer?
So actually in 2021, we've seen a slight dip, believe it or not, in the amount of the cost of a ransom has dipped just a touch. It's enough to say that we see a downward curve, but we've also seen an increase in ransomware activity or in cyber threat activity. As long as the threat actors can monetize or gain benefit from doing this, we're going to see it over and over and over again. Is we think about some of the events that have occurred here yet in this year, whether it's the Colonial Pipeline that was hit or whether it was the food processing folks up in Minnesota, it's going to continue to happen. So as you build partnerships with vendors, upstream supply chain folks, downstream customers, what you want to do is have the discussions and before it becomes an issue, right? Such that if one of your upstream suppliers has an event, they're letting you know. And so you can be aware of what's going to happen or what their plan is. Or maybe identifying in your supply chain an important manufacturer who is supplying stuff and actually asking them, hey, do you have an incident response policy? What is your plan should a ransomware attack hit your organization? And if they don't have a good answer for it, question them on it. And if they still don't have a good answer for it, maybe that's the flag that you should find an alternative manufacturing source. Now, that sounds pretty drastic, but in this day and age, if you want to maintain operations, you're going to want to be aware of what your upstream manufacturing vendors, what they're doing to protect their production and to ultimately protect you. It's having that discussion and knowing where they're at, Kat. It's only going to increase.
Definitely. Yeah, we had a conversation yesterday. We were talking about, what does it mean to be a great vendor from that perspective? And as you are having that conversation, what would be some key questions you might ask to truly understand, are they doing everything to stay as safe and secured as possible from cyber attacks?
You might go back to the slide, and I'll take us back here real quick, of these action blocks. What we're talking about your organization doing, you might ask these same questions, right? Does your organization protect systems and emails by the use of multi-factor authentication? How often does your vendor go and test their backups? How do they train and raise cybersecurity awareness with their staff? These are all very valid questions of any vendor that you should be asking. I find in this day and age, that a lot of heating and cooling vendors want to plug their system into your network because it allows them to be able to troubleshoot an event before they even have to send a truck over, right? And that's a big thing in these COVID times. But yet we so quickly allow that vendor to plug in without asking them questions. Well, how are you protecting this device? Will you patch that device, or am I responsible for patching the device? These are all great questions, and the questions that we're asking ourselves are questions that we should not be embarrassed to ask any vendor that wants to connect to our network or wants to provide us a service.
Awesome. Thank you. No, I really appreciate that. And, as you're going through and building, we talk a bit about the incident response plan. How often should you be updating this? How often should you be, discussing it with your teammates? What does that cadence look like?
Well, in a lot of cases, putting together an incident response plan takes effort and time. And typical of any plan, it's only as good as the time you're willing to invest. But just developing the plan isn't the final destination. Kat, to your point, you're going to want to run what's called a tabletop exercise, where you take the plan and you sit down and you have a mock event and you walk through it and say, hey, based on our plan, does it make sense? And you want to do that tabletop exercise at least once a year. That's going to allow you to go through and say, okay, yeah, all of this is still valid. Organizations change. Anytime there's a significant change, maybe the addition of a new division, or maybe the implementation of a new significant application. Maybe your organization has been using Dynamics as a CRM tool and is getting ready to migrate over to Salesforce. Anytime there's a significant event like that within your operation, you want to go back and look at the incident response plan and say, hey, how important is CRM and maybe our operations? And did we call it out in any of the scenarios in our incident response? The simple answer is you need to look at it at least once a year. And then also you need to run through that tabletop exercise at least once a year.
Awesome. Thank you. I have one more question. If anyone has any other questions, feel free to put them in the chat. But my last question is, with cyber attacks on the rise, what can we expect in the next 5 years?
Well, we can expect that having these cyber definition or discussions is going to be part of just business operations. Attacks are not going to go away. They're going to become more mainstream. The notion that it is not a matter of if but when is only going to increase. In fact, we're seeing some folks out there that have been gone through a ransomware event and they think they've plugged all the holes and got everything back, and 60 days later they get hit again because the threat actors that did it know where your weaknesses are, and if you don't get them all, they're going to come back and exploit them. So I think this notion of the next couple of years is it's building in some of these action items into your normal business operations, right? Sitting at a finance meeting and having a dialogue. Okay, what's our cyber posture? Are we secure? Is our data safe? Can we get our systems back online quickly? Are all things that are going to find their way into meeting agendas and what have you over the course of the coming months and quarters. They have to, because we've become so dependent on the technology that if the tech is taken away, we're going to have to get it back quickly. We see a lot of data from the insurance companies about how long it takes organizations to get back up and running after an event. But really, the factor we don't see is how many organizations really don't come back after an event. And unfortunately, that number is arguably somewhere between 20 and 25% of organizations that have a ransomware event or a cyber event don't fully recover, and in many cases shutter permanently because of it. We've got to be able to take these discussions, these actions, and bring them into our culture so that we can ensure both the safety and ongoing operation and that comfort that it's not one of these things that's keeping you up at night. I've got 3 kids. I always tease them that when they're home, I have 3 adult children. As a parent, I still stay up at night when they're out running around. We just went through this at Thanksgiving because I still worry about them, right? But yet when they're back at their own homes and apartments, I don't. How do we get to a point with cybersecurity that we're not being and having all these sleepless nights? And I think that's going to be the key, Cat. This is just going to be commonplace, right? The frequency, the challenges that we're going to encounter are just going to be ever increasing, and we've got to get to a point that we can get back to having restful nights because we know we've been having the discussions and we're prepared.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for sharing, more about key things people should be aware of as they're looking at cyber attacks. I think it's really important. And do you want to kind of lead us off with the key next steps?
Sure. As you walk away from today's presentation, couple things. One, the next meeting you run for your company, incorporate a cybersecurity discussion. It's very easy to get started and say, hey, what cyber incidents have we heard about in the news or the things that people have read? That might be a way to bring it into your meeting to begin to raise the comfort of talking about it. Develop your internal and external teams. If you remember that action item, it was to develop the team from people inside your organization as well as the people outside of your organization, specifically attorneys and insurance. Make sure that you've had the opportunity to think about how you're going to handle an event, to develop that incident response plan before the need arises. At least it's going to give you some peace of mind as you walk through the process. And the process itself is going to be valuable to the team to understand maybe where some of the holes and the risks are. Get that risk assessment. If you don't know or don't have kind of an idea of where your vulnerabilities are or what have you, work with your internal teams, hire somebody on the outside to come in and help you understand where your risks are, and empower your human firewalls. Your employees are your first and your last line of defense. And what we want to make sure of is that they have the training and the support from the organization that they feel confident if they see something or do something, they're going to say something. That cyber awareness training gives them the foundation to say, that doesn't look right. Hey, there's a problem. And empowering the humans and these human firewalls to protect the organization is key. Those are the key next steps that I would take away from today, Kat.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, thank you for everyone joining us. We will be sharing with you the key next steps via email, and I will reach out to understand, how might we be able to help you evaluate your current risk at the same time, continuing to develop that security awareness among your team members. Because as we know, it's the first and last line of defense are our employees. So thank you all. Have a great day.